Welcome to Secrets of the Stars, where we explore the ancient knowledge of astrology, decode your unique blueprint, and unveil how the wisdom of the sky contributes to your life. I'm your host, Abby Lewtas, astrologer, mentor, and sky guide. It's time to embark on a cosmic adventure of self-discovery and understanding why you are the way you are. Let's dive in. So welcome back to Secrets of the Stars, and in today's episode I am going to be sharing a little bit more about me and my journey up until this point in my life, my journey with astrology, and I'm going to share some of the key transits that have played out in my life and how they align with my astrology. So I think it's going to be really fun, and if you're ready to get to know me a little bit more, then this is the episode for you. So let's wind it right back. I grew up in a small town called Anglesea on the south coast of Victoria in Australia. And I really had a fun childhood. I grew up in a beach town. I played a lot of sports, and I had such a beautiful, supportive network around me. My family was so incredible. We got to go on family holidays all the time, and I am truly so blessed. I have the most amazing family. My brother and sister are now such beautiful friends, as are my mum and dad, and I really had a beautiful upbringing, and I am really so grateful for that beautiful, unique tribe that I had around me. When I was young, I started to become interested in sports, and it really was the underpinning, I guess, of my childhood. I was just so driven and I was committed, and as soon as I realized that I had a talent and I had some ability, I really wanted to grow that. This really points to the Capricorn rising in my chart. I was very driven. I was very dedicated. I wanted to have success. And I have another aspect in my chart, which is Mars conjunct Jupiter. Now, Mars can represent many things, but one of the things it represents is your ability to move, your ability to compete. It's also known as the god of war. And so I have this competitive planet right next to Jupiter, which is related to expansion and growth. And so these planets together can really bring out this athletic ability within me. So I just loved being involved in sports. My main two sports when I was young were gymnastics, and when I realized I was, becoming too tall for that, and it was taking up so much of my time, I started to lean back onto my athletic sprinting ability, and this is really where I was so focused for most of my childhood life, was through beach sprinting. I was fortunate to have so many opportunities with beach sprinting. I got to represent my state countless times, and then I got to represent my country. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the Kellogg's Neutral Grain series, where I was televised for beach sprinting in the competition. It was just really so wild. It took me many places. I got to travel all over Australia to the beaches and everywhere. So it was just so incredible. I was also, going to school during this time and living that normal childhood life, I suppose. But yeah, when I finished school, I really wanted to continue with my sports and see where it would go. Initially, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Maybe you could say that I still don't know, but I was interested in learning a little bit more about travel, and so I decided to study some tourism. I studied tourism and I was able to continue on competing with my sports. I went away, I moved away for university, and I did a degree that was sports tourism. So it was a combination of sport and tourism, because whilst I just loved this idea of tourism, I also loved sport and I wanted to be involved in it throughout my life. And so that's what I did. I came home after studying away. I moved up to the Northern Rivers on the east coast of Australia. And then I came back and kind of started to settle into, the real world, as I call it. I did continue to study throughout this time. I studied a master's. I have this thirst for knowledge, and I think that really shows with all the study I did. I eventually also studied massage whilst I was working, but I settled into working life in Melbourne. I worked in a sporting venue and eventually got into event management, which I really loved. I worked at Federation Square, which was a big and exciting place in the city of Melbourne. And yeah, I really loved the hype and the different things that were always happening in the city. I lived in the city for about 4 or 5 years, and after I had finished with my job in the city square of Federation Square, I looked for other jobs. I was wanting to get more involved in sporting events, but I just couldn't seem to find the right path. And I truly always did listen to my intuition and what was kind of guiding me. I took on another few jobs and they just weren't quite right. And I remember in the last job that I had when I was in Melbourne, I would get in the car every day, drive to work, and I would hear this advertisement on the radio. The advertisement was for the Defence Force, and it sort of talked about, do you really want to live in your desk job working 9 to 5? And I could hear my inner voice saying, no, I don't want to do that. I didn't want to go and work in the Defence Force, but I knew I didn't want to work in this job. And finally, after a lot of soul searching, I spent a lot of time working with a life coach. I realized that it was time for me to choose something different. For years and years and years, I had committed myself to sport. I had been really successful with my sport. I competed for Australia. I was talent ID'd into bobsledding, and I got to travel and compete for Australia. We trialed for the Olympics in bobsledding. And when that all didn't work out, it didn't all line up for me, I came back to Australia and I had the opportunity to compete for beach sprinting, the sport I'd done my entire life. And the competition was in my backyard. And so that was a real thrill. But as I was sort of getting to the end point of my time in working in Melbourne, I was also, I was also still competing, and I'd been through a really rough injury, which I will get to in a minute. I ruptured my Achilles tendon, and over this year off that I was doing my rehab and coming back, making come back to beach sprinting, I really had a chance to contemplate what I was doing with my life. And this is where I sort of started to realize that I just wanted something more. So after coming back from the injury, I competed another season, and then I decided it's time for me to go. It's time for me to travel and see the world. This was something that my beautiful cousin had sparked within me. She had been traveling so much around the world, and I just always had looked on with a sense of curiosity, and I wanted to do that too. So one day I decided I was just going to do it. I booked a ticket to Buenos Aires and I packed up my life. I packed my things into a backpack and off I went. I thought I was going for maybe around 6 months or so. I thought I would have enough. After that, I would run out of money, and then I would come back to Australia and figure out what I was going to do next. Well, when I was away traveling through South America, I realized that I didn't have to go home. I spent a fair chunk of time traveling. I lived in Argentina, and then I was thinking to myself, I don't want to go back to Australia. I'm not ready for this yet. And so I had a friend up in Canada, and she said to me, why don't you come up here? Get yourself a visa, come and work. And this sounded really appealing to me. I wanted to go up and be a part of a winter. I wanted to learn how to snowboard, and I thought, why not? So off I went. I went up to Canada and I settled in. I had the most amazing winter learning how to snowboard. And just exploring the beautiful Rockies and this beautiful town that I lived in called Fernie. I had such a fun time, and it was just like a real lease on life, new lease on life for me. This also fits into my astrological timeline, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Um, so there I was playing around in Canada, and I just really settled into life there. It was so incredibly amazing. Um, I thought I was going for a winter, and I ended up staying for 3 years. I really developed a beautiful community. I started playing roller derby, which was incredibly fun, and I just built up a beautiful network of friends around me. And so this went on, and I just loved living the life. It was a great place for me to travel from. I did more travel down to Central America. I came home to Australia for a short time, and I just had I was having a lot of fun. Someone told me after the first winter season that I should really stick around for the summer, that it would be better than the winter. And I thought to myself, how could it possibly be better than the winter? I've just had the time of my life. And sure enough, it really was. I loved hiking and biking and being in the outdoors. It was just such a truly magical place. And I was just living the life. So, about halfway through my time in Canada, I thought maybe this is where I want to stay. I want to be here forever. And so I started looking into residency and starting to think about and go through the process of what that might look like. Initially, this was fun and exciting, but then there became a point where I had all the papers printed out and I was trying to take the steps forward and I just couldn't. It was like something was stopping me, like my intuition was saying, no, this is not for you. I remember the residency papers sitting on the floor of my bedroom, and every time I looked at them, I just could not bring myself to do them. And as much as I wanted to stay there, I thought there's a little bit of meaning behind this. And I think there was a meaning, and it was calling me home to Australia. I really didn't know why or what, but that was what was happening. And so eventually, my time was running out in Canada, and I was beginning to make the transition back, moving home after living and traveling on the other side of the world. It had been truly a magical experience. And so I came home. I came back to Victoria, back to Australia. And this was quite a challenging time for me. I had spent the best part of 10 years being away from the place where I had grown up in Anglesea and my hometown, and that's where I came back to. And it really was all about this reverse culture shock experience for me. I'd been away for so long. I'd had this different life. I'd lived in Melbourne, I'd lived up on the East Coast, I'd traveled into South America, Central America, and I'd lived in Canada. And then I was coming back to the place where I'd grown up. So I really had this moment where I just feel like I could not relate to this. It felt like almost I was going back in time. It was such a bizarre experience. I really had to find my purpose and I really had to find my feet. I decided to study life coaching at this time, and it was such an incredible experience. It really opened me up to a new network of people, and I really loved growing and developing and learning about myself and about personal growth and development and how to help others do this. And this is something that I've always been fascinated in my life. It's been a common theme, is just learning how to be and live on that highest timeline, I think is so incredible, because I think there are so many experiences in life that are going to be up and down, and you have to kind of be able to roll with all of that. And so that was something that I was really fascinated with. After a few years, I got a little bored of being in this area and I just needed to pick up and move again. And there's a common theme that relates to Saturn, which is the ruler of my chart. And I'll talk about that when I get to the astrological transits. So I headed on back up to the ski fields in Australia. I went up and I used my massage skills and I made a little base for myself up there. After 3 years hanging out up there, I realized that this wasn't the place for me either. It also coincided with the lockdowns of 2020, and I was so far away from anything in a small town which I hadn't quite found my groove in, and it just wasn't the place I wanted to be. Sure enough, I started in 2019. I was really starting to look at what am I doing with my life. And I read a book called The Artist's Way. And this book really, really asked me to look at the things that I was interested in my childhood. It reignited a spark for things that I had once loved as a kid and given up for some unknown reason. And this was what sparked my interest in astrology again. I realized that all the books that I had on my bookshelf were those ones from when I was a kid, and they were all the astrology books. I was like, that's really interesting. So I started this deep dive into astrology. And when I got to a certain point, I realized I just want to learn more. And so I started reading people's charts and I just started to learn this language of astrology. Then there was an opportunity that came across my path, and that was to go and tour guide in Central Australia. During this time, I had also picked up this incredible job where I was taking school kids overseas and teaching them how to travel, essentially, giving them an experience in a different country. And that was really wild. I did that job for about 4 years, but when all the lockdowns occurred, that really ended for me. And I was really excited to be able to continue traveling so much and getting paid for it. So when this job for tour guiding came across my path, I was really excited and I was all in for it. So I packed up my life yet again and moved all my things. I downsized and I headed on up to Central Australia, where I have been guiding on the Larapinta Trail for the past 3 years. It's really been an incredible experience. But it has led me into this real transient lifestyle. I did also do some guiding down in Tasmania, and I've sort of been back and forth and jumping all around. And now I am living in a van and on the east coast of Australia. So I don't really know what is next for me, but I am certainly excited to still be on this traveling adventure and exploring this world. So let's go back to my journey about astrology. I really think that this was sparked by my mom as an interest when I was a kid, because she was the one that was buying me all these astrology books. I am a Leo. I'm a Leo sun, and so if you know anything about Leos, they can be very self-focused. They want to know about themselves. And this was what sparked my curiosity when I was reading all of these books. I was like, yes, this is me. Yes, this is me. Yes, this is me. There was a small part of me that didn't always relate to that. And I think that's now, since I've found out that my moon is in Aquarius, that was where that piece fit in. So when I was in Mount Beauty up in the ski fields in 2019, a lot had been happening in my life, and I was reading this book, The Artist's Way. This really was a transformational book that got me to look back to my childhood and the things that I was really interested. And this really re-inspired my thirst for astrology, my curiosity for astrology, because it asks you the things that you're interested when you're a child. And I realized that, I'm not sure why, but I had given up the interest in astrology. Perhaps it was because it wasn't cool anymore. Perhaps it was because the people around me were no longer interested in that sort of thing. But this was something that I still was curious about. So I started listening to podcasts. I started reading books. I looked up courses. I would study my natal chart. And then I took courses. And then it was in 2020 that I really, after all this binge listening and binge learning, I really wanted to take the next step. So what I was learning was the next step to learning more about astrology was to start reading charts of your friends, reading charts of the people around you, anyone that was interested. And so that is what I did in 2020. I just started reading people's charts and really gaining a deeper, more interesting, curious, insight into astrology. So then last year, I thought, I want to share this even more. I started my Instagram page, Stars by Abby, and I just started sharing what I know, what I knew about astrology. And this just started to grow. I have been attracting the people into my world that are interested, that align with me, and this is really, what keeps me going. It's just that all these people around me in my community, you guys, everyone who is listening today, however you have found me, it really keeps me going because I want to share this knowledge of what I have learned and how it has helped me. So that is how I have come to where I am today. And now I have a little astrology business. I spent last summer in Victoria spending time reading charts at markets, and I'm going to be continuing on doing the same. I do read charts online and I do forecasting, and I just love deep diving into astrology. I've been writing horoscopes for nearly a year now, and I'm just having so much fun. I feel like so many people are resonating with the horoscopes that I'm writing. So that is really, really cool. And that has been so exciting. I've just kept taking the next step. I've kept following the breadcrumb. What is it that interests me? And now I'm here with this podcast, and I'm so excited to be sharing all this astrology with you. So, I want to take a look at some of the things in my astrology timeline to just give you an indication of how things have played out. Now, as I said in the first episode, some of the language that I'm going to use is very much jargon, it's very much relative to astrology. And so, please hang in there and it will make sense in the long run. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is that I am a Capricorn rising. Every sign has a ruling planet, and Capricorn's ruling planet is Saturn. Now, the planet that rules our rising sign is known as the ruler of your chart and has a very strong influence in your chart. So, for me, Saturn is the ruler of my chart. Saturn's qualities are all about constriction, they're about discipline, they're about boundaries. Saturn is very much the timekeeper of the zodiac, and it's associated with maturity and can be associated with tension and struggle. A lot of people don't really like the planet Saturn because it's the planet that is here to teach you the hard lessons. Well, I definitely can relate to this in my life. As much as, the timeline that I've just given you probably sounds like a lot of fun and enjoyment, I have also perhaps not really followed the traditional life path as most women have. I've kind of followed my intuition and let it guide me. I have not worked in a traditional job. I have packed up and traveled in my late 20s and also in my 30s, and now I still am wandering around in a very transient lifestyle. But that is because it is what is true for me. It's what my inner guide and my intuition is asking me to do. Now let's get back to Saturn. Saturn has a cycle where it changes signs approximately every 3 years. And I have really seen this 3 year cycle play out in my own life. So when I was over in Canada, I lived over there for 3 years. When I moved back from Canada, I moved back to Australia and I lived on the coast for 3 years. Then, when I moved away from the coast, I moved up to Mount Beauty for 3 years. I've also just been guiding in the Northern Territory for the past 3 winters. So you can really see how this cycle of Saturn and its 3 year kind of theme is playing out in my life. So I think that is super, super interesting. The next thing I want to talk about is a major turning point that I had in my life. In 2003, when I was 21, I was in a serious car accident. It was full on. I'm not going to lie. I was traveling on a road close to my home and I hit a car. We were both traveling at 100 kilometers an hour. It was pretty crazy that everyone involved survived the accident. But I wanted to share a little bit about the astrology of this. So again, I have a Capricorn rising. And so Saturn is the ruling planet of my chart, of my life. And so Saturn has a big influence here. This also shows that in a timing technique called annual perfections. I was 21 years old. So I was in a ninth house perfection year. And my ninth house is ruled by Mercury. Hang in there because I'm getting to the details. So when I had this accident, this ruling planet of Mercury that was ruling this particular year of my life, this is what annual perfections do, they rule a certain year. I had Mercury conjunct Neptune in the 12th house, which relates to loss and suffering and struggle. I had Mercury in the 12th house, which was next to the Sun and Pluto. So I had lots of energy in this 12th house of loss and suffering and struggle and challenge. I had Mercury ruling the 6th house, which pertains to accidents. And then I had Mercury and Uranus oppose one another. Now, Uranus is the planet of sudden change, of dramatic events, things that are unexpected. So those two planets were also having a conversation. I also had Jupiter in my ninth house, which was that being ruled by Mercury, and Jupiter is expansion. So, Jupiter is really a benefic, but in this case, I think it was really expanding this Mercury and what it was doing in my chart. And I also had Uranus, which is this planet of incidents and accidents in a harmonious aspect with Jupiter. So again, expanding things. Let's talk a little bit more about Uranus, because at the time of this car accident, there was a lot going on with Uranus in my chart as well. Uranus was in alignment with my moon. So my moon is my reflection of my life. The Uranus was in a square aspect with Uranus itself. Uranus was trine my Mars and trine my Pluto. So Mars and Pluto can be challenging planets in our chart. And then Mars, the planet that is known for cars, I suppose, and anything moving fast, was in a challenging aspect with Neptune. So all these aspects were playing into this moment in time of this, this really quite scary and challenging car accident that I was involved in. I want to talk next about my sporting successes, because this has been a very strong theme in my life and I wanted to tie it back into my chart. So I want to talk a little bit about Jupiter, because Jupiter is the planet of expansion, and it's the planet of abundance, and where we have opportunities and where we have growth. Well, Jupiter is conjunct Mars in my natal chart. So, Mars, the planet of movement, action, can be known as the warrior or the god of war. It's always very closely tied to competition and sports. And because Jupiter there is next to Mars, it is really expanding this for me. So my sporting successes really align with my Jupiter return. And the Jupiter return happens every 12 years when Jupiter comes back to the same point in the chart where Jupiter was when you first were born. So, looking at my timeline here, my first Jupiter return was in 1993, and I was first selected for representing my state in surf life saving. So, this is really, really wild. The other thing that happened around that time, astrologically speaking, was I was starting a new moon cycle in a technique that's called a secondary progression. And this was again when I was first starting to become known in the sports, and I was first starting to have success. My second Jupiter return was around 2005 and 2006, and this was the time where I was really excelling in my beach sprinting. I had been talent ID'd into bobsledding as well. So in 2005 and 2006, my second Jupiter return, I was on my way overseas traveling to represent Australia in bobsled. Now, this didn't eventuate. I didn't get to go to the Olympics in bobsledding. I represented Australia. I got to compete on the World Cup circuit, and but I didn't get to make the Olympics. But when the selectors found that out, I was offered a spot in the Australian team for surf life saving. And so this was a really expansive time. I had so many opportunities in my sporting career. The third Jupiter return was in 2017, and this was when I was really having a lot of success with roller derby. So I had gone off on my travels, and I come back and I was really getting involved with roller derby. And so this was when I was selected in the team to go over to the US and compete as part of Victoria's roller derby team. So was really quite an expansive time as well. So you can see how these Jupiter returns have really been prominent in my sporting life. Next, I want to talk about my Achilles rupture. So this happened on the 30th of November in 2009. So this was an accident that kind of stopped me in my tracks, and it really was a big turning point, because up until that point, I had been an athlete for my whole life and I hadn't really considered much else. So what was going on at that time? I had the moon squaring my sun. So, what does this mean? The moon is our emotions, it's our inner world. The square is a tense or a challenging aspect, and the sun is where we like to shine. So, essentially, I was shining in the sport of sprinting still. I was actually coming up to have one of the best seasons of my life. But then the moon was coming into this tense, challenging aspect, and my Achilles snapped. The other thing that I find really fascinating is that my moon is in the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius rules the Achilles. So it's just wild. I also had Venus conjunct Uranus. What does this mean? Venus is about the things we love, the things we value. And when it's conjunct a planet or in the same position, it's merging with that energy. And Uranus's energy is all about sudden change, chaos, throwing your world into turmoil. There I was doing a sport which I loved so much. And then this planet aligns with my Uranus to shake up everything, to rupture my Achilles and really, give me a whole new lease on life. I also have Pluto. I had Pluto in what's called sextile with Jupiter. So Pluto is the god of the underworld. It wants to go down, pull up all the crap and transmute it, transform it in this harmonious aspect with the planet that expands things. Jupiter expands things. So there I was, having to face this transformation in a very, very big way. The other thing I had going on was that Mars, the planet of competition, anger, aggression, competitiveness, was in a harmonious aspect with Saturn, the planet of challenges. So there I was again, my competition, my movement ability was, being constricted from Saturn. So it is really, really just wild. I was 27 years old when this happened, and I was going through what is called a third house perfection. So the third house was being lit up for me. Now, my third house is it's Pisces, and so it's that dreamy energy of like thinking, maybe not of this world. It's a little bit not of this world, but it's also related to my local environment, my local community. And this was kind of shaking up that area of my life. So that is super, super wild. Next, I'm going to talk about my Saturn return because I really think this was a big part of me understanding my astrology and how it plays out in my life. And then I have one more thing to talk about and I'll wrap up this episode. But let's talk at my Saturn return. So the Saturn return is when Saturn comes back to the same point in your chart as it was when you were born. For me, this was in Libra. It was Saturn returning in Libra. And so in my chart, Libra is the area of my chart that looks after my career, looks after what I want to be known for in my life. So let's sort of step this through. So on the 30th of October, which was sort of just before my sort of Saturn return, Saturn entered the sign of Libra. So it was wasn't sitting right on my other sign of Saturn. It had just entered, and a month later was when I had ruptured my Achilles, and this really started this new contemplation of I've been an athlete my whole life. It's time I sort of wanted to do something new, and so that was just the energy of Saturn coming into Libra. When I had the first hit of Saturn on my actual Saturn, which is 17 degrees Libra, it was the 11th of January. So then on the 12th of January, I'd been going through this contemplation after having recovered from the Achilles rupture, spending a year sort of recovering. I had decided that I wanted to go traveling. So the 11th of January was when I had my very first exact Saturn return. And that was sort of there until the 12th of February. So from the 11th to the 12th, Saturn was sitting on my exact Saturn return. On the 11th of February, I booked my ticket to Buenos Aires. I just think that is so wild. I booked my ticket to travel over and I was planning on leaving my job. So it was like within that time frame of Saturn being on my exact my exact return. So there it was. I like quit my job, Saturn that lives in this area of my chart that's related to my job, and I just decided I'm throwing it in. So the second hit, because what happened is Saturn retrograde and it came back over these degrees again. So it came over 17 degrees Libra and had another hit for me. So this hit was around the 18th to the 27th of September. Well, on the 15th of September, I secured my working visa to Canada. So I was really completely changing my working environment. I was moving to a different country, a different part of the world. I was doing something completely new. I was going to go and work as a massage therapist in Canada. That was the second hit of my Saturn return. So it is just incredibly wild. I was also going on a fourth house perfection. So the fourth house is all about your home, and I had completely uplifted and I was traveling to a new part of the world, finding a new home for myself. The other thing that was happening was I was experiencing a full moon in terms of my secondary progression. So everything was lighting up for me. I was coming to a peak time frame. My sporting career was coming to a peak, and I was choosing to step into a new and a different life. So it is absolutely wild. So I will go into detail in a little bit more about what all these transits mean, what all these aspects that I'm talking about, what they all mean. But I just wanted to finish by sort of talking about this new moon that is coming up for me. It's called a secondary progression. So essentially when we do secondary progressions with the moon, it moves one little degree every day in our chart, and we can spend the first, depending on where the moon phase is when you are born, will depend on when you come into these new moon and full moon phases. And the cycle is like about 30 years. And so if you were born, like I was born on a full moon, and so around the age of 15 was my new moon phase. And then another 15 years later, I was back in my full moon phase. So next November 2024, the 22nd of November 2024, I'm going to be going through a new moon phase in secondary progression. And I really feel like I have been in this dark moon energy for the last several years. I've had ideas, I've started my astrology business, and now I am really seeing this as this seeding of this new moon idea that is going to be playing out in my life, and it is truly so exciting. So that's a wrap for today. I hope it hasn't been too complicated talking about these transits and these progressions and how astrology has played out in my life. I hope you have a deeper understanding of me and who I am. Please, if you have any questions, come on over to Instagram. I'm at Stars by Abby. I love chatting with you all, and I look forward to talking astrology. And until next time, keep shining bright. Thank you for joining me on this cosmic journey of self-discovery. If you have enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with someone who you think would love it. Keep exploring the secrets of the stars, and remember, the universe has woven a unique story just for you. Until next time, keep shining bright.